Hello again, and welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. Today is a bit of a special day. It's a Thursday, but my beautiful girlfriend Morena has gone to the office. Perhaps you remember going to the office from those pre-COVID days. So I thought that since I have the house to myself for a day, I would drink beer on the sofa in my underwear. But then I thought, well, it's only 12 o'clock. It's a little bit early for that. Maybe I'll record a podcast first. So, as usual, I am your host, Daniel Welsh, coming to you from the beautiful city of Barcelona, where I am at home alone with only minimal works in the building. So if you hear some pounding on one of the walls, I apologize. That would be my upstairs neighbor remodeling something, but it's minimal today, so we're okay. Generally, a peaceful, quiet day. Today's topic, 5 questions people ask Americans abroad, and my answers. This will be a bit less Spain-focused and a bit more life abroad in general focused. I've been living in Spain for about 18 years now. A lot of times I feel like I'm sort of an unpaid American ambassador. I spend a lot of time answering people's questions about the American way of life, in quotes. So much time, in fact, that it seems like it's practically my part-time job. And I'm not really the typical rah-rah American patriot when I answer most of these questions. I'm not really that person in general, although I have come to appreciate it more the longer I've not been there. The rah-rah patriotic types usually don't travel too far from home, from what I've seen, and the ones who do go abroad are usually on the liberal end of the political spectrum. The Americans abroad are usually more liberal because liberal Americans tend to have a thing for Europe and for international travel and stuff like that, people who might be more conservative don't necessarily have. Not to make huge generalizations. Of course, the rest of this article will be full of generalizations, so I apologize in advance. In any case, if the State Department knew what a lazy, half-assed job I'm doing as an unofficial ambassador, they'd probably send someone more qualified. I'm waiting for the black helicopters to show up and hopefully award me a cushy pension for all this work I've been doing. Anyway, what are these questions that people are always asking? Well, first a caveat. Like I said, I'm in Spain, so if you go to other places, if you go to Japan or Zimbabwe or Argentina, maybe the questions people ask you as an American will be different. But here in Spain, this is what I get. First one, why are Americans so ignorant of other countries? I've talked about the topic of American ignorance on the blog, expatmadrid.com, if you would like to read about it. And I suppose there's something to be said for it. The USA is a very big country, and most people never have the need or the desire or the money to travel abroad. A lot of people, from what I understand, just don't go abroad because they can't afford it. You've seen the statistics that 90% of Americans or whatever don't have a passport. Well, apparently that was true a few decades ago. Now it's becoming less true. The prices of travel abroad have been going down. The prices of flights across the Atlantic, etc., have been going down. And so more people are traveling. In any case, here in Europe, people have had a couple of decades of low-cost flights around Europe, and before that there was some Interrail and stuff. There are programs like the Erasmus program. Erasmus, I suppose, would be the pronunciation. And within Europe, the border situation is really easy. You don't need a visa to go anywhere. You don't even need a visa to work somewhere. So you can pick up, if you're a Spanish person, you can pick up and move to Germany tomorrow. You could move to Italy tomorrow. You could move to Portugal tomorrow. There's 20 or 25 countries where you have no bureaucratic problems with just moving in and starting to work. So that would make Europeans think that international travel is a little bit more normal than we think in the US. Also, there's always these TV programs where they go around, they go to a Walmart parking lot somewhere with a world map and ask people to locate Canada. And people in Walmart parking lots sometimes have no idea where Canada is. I suspect there's some creative editing on those reports or whatever, and they leave out the people who actually do know where Canada is. But I'm not sure. I would also love to see somebody do that here in Spain and see if their results are better. I do not believe that Spanish people are amazing at geography in some way that Americans are not. So, why are Americans so ignorant of other countries? Well, maybe they're not, maybe they are. I would say also that our school system puts a lot of emphasis on the importance of the USA and our history. It seems to me, from what I remember, most of what we learned in history class was US history. It was a whole lot of American Revolution stuff. Essentially, it was the American Revolution over and over again for about 12 years, with occasional forays into other events. But we really did learn a lot about the US. On the other hand, when people ask me why Americans are so ignorant, if I'm not in the mood to answer politely, I might ask them, please tell me everything you know about my home state of Arizona before we continue. And most people have no idea about Arizona. Usually they say something like, well, Arizona is a city in Texas, and it's located somewhere in the center of the country. I used to play the US map game with my English students back when I was teaching, the US map game, not the world map game. But if you ask somebody where Arizona is on a blank map of the US, they just might point to Kansas or Nebraska or something that's about 1,500 miles from where actual Arizona is. When you tell them that Arizona is a state in the Southwest, they might say, are you sure? Are you really sure? I knew it was a city in Texas. Ignorance is not exclusively an American trait, in other words. So the difference is, I think, that people from a lot of other countries have spent a lot of their lives watching American TV and movies, so they think they know a lot about the US and life in the US. We'll talk a little bit about movies later, but generally, if you test people for specific facts about the US, you might be surprised at how little they know, despite having watched a whole lot of content created by Hollywood. Question 2. What's the deal with all the guns? Well, my answer for this question is I don't really know. The gun lobby is very powerful for some reason, but the government also manages to regulate other industries and keep dangerous objects and substances out of the hands of the wrong people. I read a couple years ago that a game called Lawn Darts had been prohibited because it's too dangerous. However, you can buy guns. I'm not a constitutional scholar. The Second Amendment is pretty ambiguous, but the interpretations, I have no idea. I have no idea why guns are still such a huge problem. It must be said, though, that some other countries are much more dangerous than the US, despite having fewer guns per capita. You can look at the data of countries and gun ownership versus countries and violence. El Salvador, for example, has a small fraction of the guns that the US has, but much more violence. So maybe the question is not what's the deal with guns, but what's the deal with Americans killing each other? That's probably a much longer story, and I really don't have a good answer for it either. In any case, I did grow up in Arizona, and we had a couple of guns at home, and it's a lot of fun to watch the look on European people's faces when I describe how my dad would take me shooting when I was very young. I definitely was not over age 10 when I started going shooting with my dad and some of his friends. We would wake up very early in the morning. We would go out to these places in the middle of the desert. I believe they were places that had been designated shooting ranges or something like that, but it was a long time ago. And it was a lot of fun. But European people usually would not approve of, handing your 8-year-old kid a gun and telling him to take aim at that target over there. Anyway, that's question number 2 about the guns. I don't have an answer. Question number 3. Are you a Trump supporter? Or, more recently that we have a different president, are you a Republican? Short answer is no. I wouldn't call myself a supporter of any politician. I'm more like resigned to the general futility of politics and trying to make an impact in other ways. I really don't think that worrying about party politics day in and day out is a good way to spend my time. If anything, it would just stress me. So I try not to worry too much. One of the reasons why is because I moved to Spain in 2004, and I was in Madrid just before the election where George W. Bush was reelected. I was super pissed about the whole political situation in the US back then. I was worried about it. I was angry that we had President Bush running around, invading countries, etc. And guess what? Being pissed didn't help. So I try not to get too worked up about politics these days, at least not in the standard sense of worrying about what a bunch of guys in suits are doing in faraway places. Also, I've yet to actually meet a real Trump supporter. I follow some of them on Twitter, but most of these Trump supporters / Republican type people don't travel very far, as I mentioned in point number 1. Anyway, I don't want to make this political, so moving on to more fruitful conversations. We've got question 4. Why are so many Americans overweight or obese? This is a question I've thought about a lot too, because it's a public health problem that's actually quite worrying. Once again, I don't want to make this all political. I understand that it's even not quite politically correct to mention obesity as a problem these days, but it is a problem. Why are there so many seriously overweight people? Well, I have a few guesses, although it is sort of a complex issue, as are many. For one thing, Americans spend most of their time driving or sitting down. There's just not much walking going on. Where I'm from, we didn't even have sidewalks. Everybody would drive everywhere. I used to have the police called on me just for being a teenager who was out taking a walk on our little suburban streets, because people imagined that teenager taking a walk was probably going to be committing some kind of crime. Being in a car? No problem. Walking? Probably a criminal. So there's a social aspect of people just thinking you're some kind of psycho if you're out for a walk. This was outside Phoenix, Arizona, in the desert 20 years ago. Your mileage may vary. Maybe taking a walk is the most normal activity possible where you're from. Here, in my major European city, now Barcelona, before Madrid, I walk for an hour or more a day as part of my lifestyle. I have a Fitbit now. It tells me that I walk about 10 or 12 kilometers a day, actually, without even attempting to exercise. 10 or 12 kilometers is I go to the cafe in the morning, I go to the supermarket, I go to the gym. I exercise at the gym, but walking to the gym is another 15 minutes of movement. I walk back from the gym, I go to some restaurant for lunch, I go to a bar before dinner, and by the end of the day, I've done 10 or 12 kilometers without actually attempting to exercise. So there's that. Just more active lifestyles built into the urban environment, which is, of course, something you should consult an urban sociologist about, not your favorite blogger slash podcaster. The other thing that I would say is US food culture, or perhaps lack of food culture. My understanding and my memory of living there is that people in the US often tend to just graze on different foods all day long. They might have a candy bar or pop out for a frappuccino if they're a little bit hungry. I know a few people who moved from the US to Spain and still think that having Pop-Tarts or breakfast cereal for dinner is a perfectly acceptable way to spend your life. I think generally that people in the US are victims of marketing for the worst kinds of foods. Many have lost the difference between real natural food and completely artificial pseudo food. Once again, I'm sure there's a sociological element to this. I'm sure there are class differences in what people are eating and regional differences in what people are eating, but in my limited experience, lots of people are just eating processed stuff all day long, riding the wave of insulin straight to Diabetesville, as you could say. Finally, there's a social aspect. I do remember when Body Mass Index came out. People started talking about Body Mass Index on the radio. Our local radio station, KTAR 620 AM, told us how to calculate body mass, because I guess the authorities had established that body mass was going to be the new thing. Everyone in my family went and calculated the body mass index. I was running on the cross-country team at school at that time, so I was emaciated according to some in my family, but actually according to the BMI, I was just normal. My parents both clocked in at obese, and I perfectly remember their reaction when they found this out. Their reaction was, "I'm not obese. Tom at the office, he's obese. I'm actually a lot thinner than most people." And they were right. If you are surrounded by 300-pound people, then being 240 pounds makes you seem like the thin one. There's plenty of data about this, that people who are overweight tend to hang around other people who are overweight, and if you change someone's environment to be hanging around with fit people, they lose some weight. Social behaviors are contagious. It's monkey see, monkey do, and we are just monkeys. So the social aspect where being surrounded by a lot of other people with a high body mass index would make having a high body mass index more socially acceptable. Anyway, here in Europe, the situation is, like I said, a bit different. It depends on the country. In the UK, they have a similar problem to the US, and there are plenty of other countries out there with similar problems, but the US kind of has this reputation of being full of very large people. Finally, question 5 that Americans get when they are living abroad. Is life in the US just like in the movies? My answer is a little bit. I guess it depends on which movies you're talking about. Most Hollywood movies that I've seen were different from my life back in the US for 2 main reasons. Number 1, they're about people who are much wealthier than average. And 2, they're made to entertain, so they skip over the part where 95% of life is mind-numbingly boring, pointless, and otherwise lame. European cinema is very different, I must say. Often the directors out here will make intentionally boring films as a statement about the meaninglessness of existence. For example, Netflix is changing this a little bit. Netflix is making Spanish series, and I guess local series in many different markets, which are more exciting. But for the longest time, we've just had these sort of government-funded cinema industries where the result is not exceptionally exciting most of the time. In the US, we are definitely into drama, car chases, alien abductions, and stuff like that. The kids being abducted by aliens in these movies are virtually always upper middle class. It's difficult to imagine somebody having, Brad Pitt as an action hero in some typical movie where he's living in a trailer and his kids are abducted by aliens. That would just be a very strange movie. However, if he's an upper middle class guy and there's a zombie apocalypse, I believe there is a movie where he's an upper middle class guy and a zombie apocalypse happens. World War Z, if I remember correctly. I've never seen the movie, but according to a quick Google search, Brad Pitt's character in that is a former UN investigator, not country club janitor, for example. So, once again, people in US movies are generally much wealthier than the average, so people in other countries might get the idea that everyone in the US has these fantastic suburban lifestyles. When people ask more specific questions about life in the US versus their impressions of it, they usually are asking something that they've gotten from these teenage movies. Like, is there really a captain of the football team who's dating a cheerleader and a bunch of cool kids who lord it over all the dorks in high school? And the answer to that is, probably. It depends. Where I grew up, football was not a huge thing. But we still did have this dynamic of captain of the football team and banging the cheerleaders or whatever. I was not one of those people. I guess I was one of the dorks. So I did see it, though, and it was not as exciting as a teen movie, but, it does happen. My local friends claim that the cool kid/loser dichotomy doesn't exist in Spanish schools. And what do I know? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe Spanish young folks are just living in a wonderful high school utopia where there's no social hierarchy. But I doubt it. It probably just takes other forms. Spanish people also tend to be curious about things like cul-de-sacs in suburban neighborhoods. Paper bags at the supermarket used to be an impossible thing here. They're a little bit more popular now with the whole eco boom. And, things like taking your kids to Little League practice. All of which do exist, and they seem like important cultural traditions if you're out there in suburbia. Enough that they're just put in as incidentals to every movie and TV show. Final question that people ask. I'm really sorry I didn't mention this before, but the most common thing that people say when I say I'm from the US is I say, yeah, I'm from Arizona, actually, in the middle of the desert. And the response is inevitably, oh, the US, I love New York. I kind of pause and say, well, that's cute because where I'm from is nothing like New York. It's hard to convince people, though, that Arizona is nothing like New York because they just assume it's close by, that I can take a day trip to see the Empire State Building whenever I want. The US is actually a very big country, and most places are far more boring. New York and LA are about 10% of the country, but the other 90% of us live in places which just kind of suck. Once again, your mileage may vary. Maybe you're from an awesome place, or maybe you're from New York. I'm not, so when people try to convince me that I must be right around the corner from Fifth Avenue, well, I get a bit touchy about it sometimes. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Please forgive me if I've offended your sentiments in some way. I do my best to be fair and balanced. Fair and balanced for everyone, American and otherwise. What do you think? Let me know in the comments as always. Well, I'm reading this off of a blog post, but you could go to expatmadrid.com and contact me there. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you're in Spain or some other country, if people ask you the same thing. If you do happen to be from New York, I'm sure that you have a different conversation about how people love New York than I do. If you do happen to live in Japan, maybe Japanese people have a totally different idea of Americans than Spanish people. Anyway, I hope this has been interesting for you. Like I said, expatmadrid.com. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever you're subscribing to podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram. You can friend me on Facebook if you want. I don't post too much on there anymore, but, anything is possible. And please send me a message. Let me know what you would like to learn about Spain and Spanish life. I'm happy to help out if I can. Anyway, nothing more for today. I hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world. Until next time, bye.